$40 million. That's not what he lost. That's just what was left in legal fees after everything else was gone. At the peak of his power, Mike Tyson was worth $400 million. He owned tigers. He owned mansions on 3 continents. He had a private jet, a personal chef, an entourage of 60 people on his payroll, 60, and a boxing record that made grown men in locker rooms go quiet when his name came up. And then, in less than a decade, every single dollar vanished. Not stolen in the night, not lost in one bad bet, bled out, slowly, systematically, and in broad daylight through a financial machine that was specifically designed to drain him while making him feel like a king. But here's the part that nobody talks about. Mike Tyson fought back, not in the ring, in the courtroom, in depositions, in civil suits that stretched across years against the very people who had smiled at ringside while his bank accounts quietly emptied. And what happened in those legal battles, the evidence that surfaced, the receipts that were never supposed to see the light of day, the witnesses who changed their stories under oath, is one of the most extraordinary financial and legal dramas in American sports history. This is not a story about boxing. This is a story about power, betrayal, legal warfare, and what it actually takes to claw your name back from the people who built their careers on your destruction. And it starts with a man named Don King. Rewind, 1986. Mike Tyson is 20 years old, and he is terrifying. Not metaphorically, literally terrifying. Sports writers are running out of words. Commentators are losing their composure on live television. Men who have covered boxing their entire professional lives are sitting at ringside watching this kid from Brownsville, Brooklyn, and genuinely struggling to explain what they are seeing. He knocks out Trevor Berbick in 2 rounds to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history, 20 years old, and the entire world pivots toward him at the same moment. Now understand what that moment means financially. A fighter at that level, a champion with that kind of crossover appeal, that kind of cultural gravity, is not just an athlete, he is an industry. Licensing deals, endorsements, pay-per-view percentages, gate receipts, appearance fees, international promotions. The revenue streams attached to a fighter like Tyson in the late 80s are staggering, and they require sophisticated management to protect. Mike Tyson did not have sophisticated management. What he had was Don King. Don King, for those who need the background, was already one of the most controversial figures in professional sports before Tyson ever stepped into his orbit. He had promoted Muhammad Ali. He had promoted Larry Holmes. He had made enormous amounts of money in boxing and had been accused repeatedly by multiple fighters of financial manipulation, contract fraud, and outright theft. He was also electrifying, charming, brilliant in a room, and politically connected in ways that made him almost untouchable. When Tyson's longtime trainer and legal guardian Cus D'Amato died in 1985, and when Tyson's manager Jim Jacobs died in 1988, the protective structure around Mike Tyson collapsed almost overnight. The 2 men who understood both Tyson's vulnerability and the predatory nature of the boxing business were gone within 3 years of each other. Don King stepped directly into that vacuum, and what followed was not just mismanagement. It was, according to the lawsuits that would eventually be filed, a carefully constructed financial scheme that funneled money away from Tyson's accounts through a web of shell companies, inflated expenses, double-billed costs, and contracts so deliberately complex that even experienced attorneys spent years untangling them. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because before any of this reaches a courtroom, something has to break. And in Mike Tyson's story, the break comes in 1992, and it is not financial at all. February 10, 1992. Mike Tyson is convicted of rape in Indianapolis, Indiana, and sentenced to 6 years in prison, serving 3. Now, the criminal case is not the focus of this video, but what it does, financially and legally, is critical to understanding everything that comes after. While Tyson is in prison, he is not generating revenue. The fights are not happening. The pay-per-view machines are idle, but the expenses, the people on the payroll, Don King's promotional agreements, those keep running. And when Tyson walks out of prison in 1995, he is already in a financial hole that most people around him, including Tyson himself, do not fully understand. He has been shielded from the numbers, kept focused on training, on comebacks, on the spectacle of his return. The ledger is someone else's responsibility. That someone else is Don King. Tyson's first fight after prison against Peter McNeely in August 1995 earns approximately $96 million in pay-per-view revenue. $96 million from one fight. And Tyson receives approximately $25 million of that. Now, $25 million is not nothing, but stop and do the math on that split. The fighter, the man who is the entire reason the event exists, the man without whom there is no event, no revenue, no pay-per-view, no gate, he receives roughly 1/4 of what his appearance generated. Where did the rest go? That is the question that eventually puts Don King in a deposition room in front of attorneys who have spent years preparing to ask it. By the late 1990s, Tyson's inner circle is beginning to fracture. People who have been loyal, or at least quiet, are starting to talk. Accountants who have seen the books, former associates who are no longer on the payroll, advisors who have been pushed out and replaced. And one name keeps surfacing in the conversations that are starting to happen quietly around Tyson's financial situation: John Horne. Horne is Tyson's co-manager during this period, a figure who operates in the shadow of Don King, but is, according to multiple accounts, deeply embedded in the financial structure around Tyson. He and a man named Rory Holloway, Tyson's other co-manager, are receiving management fees that, when the full accounting is eventually done, will turn out to be enormous. Here is where the story begins to feel like a legal thriller, because in 1998, Tyson fires Don King. Not quietly, not amicably. He fires him with the full force of his rage and his newly awakened understanding of what has been happening to his money. He hires a new attorney, a man named Peter Parcher, and he tells him to dig into the contracts, dig into the accounting, dig into every deal King ever made in Tyson's name. Dig until you find where the money went. Peter Parcher digs, and what he finds is going to take this story into a courtroom that nobody was prepared for. The lawsuit that Mike Tyson files against Don King in 1998 is, on paper, a civil action for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and financial mismanagement. In practice, it is a declaration of war. Tyson's legal team alleges that Don King, over the course of their professional relationship, systematically underpaid Tyson by taking excessive promotional fees, double charging expenses, and structuring contracts in ways that diverted revenue away from Tyson and toward King's own companies. The number they put on it is not small: $100 million. They allege that Don King defrauded Mike Tyson out of approximately $100 million. Now, Don King does not fold. Don King has never folded in his life. He has survived federal investigations, congressional inquiries, and accusations from multiple heavyweight champions. He has lawyers, he has resources, he has decades of experience in exactly this kind of fight, and his defense is going to be built on a simple but powerful argument. Mike Tyson knew. Mike Tyson approved. Mike Tyson signed every contract, cashed every check, and enjoyed every dollar that came his way. If the numbers look wrong now, that is because boxing is a complicated business, and because Mike Tyson spent money with a velocity that no management team on earth could have offset. It is a defense that lands with some force, because the spending is real. 60 people on the payroll, exotic animals, actual Bengal tigers that cost tens of thousands of dollars a month to maintain, jewelry, cars, multiple properties simultaneously, an absolute refusal to engage with budgets or financial planning of any kind. King's team is going to use every one of those expenses as a shield, and that's when this case gets genuinely complicated, because the question at the center of this lawsuit is not simply, did Don King take money that wasn't his? The question is,
Did Don King take money that wasn't his while structuring things so that Tyson could never have known? That is a much harder question to answer in a courtroom, and the answer is going to depend almost entirely on what the documents say.
Here is something nobody tells you about financial fraud. The money rarely disappears all at once. It moves slowly, through invoices that look almost right, through fees that are almost reasonable, through contracts that are almost standard. The genius of a sophisticated financial scheme is not that it is invisible, it is that it is almost visible, almost explainable. On any single document in any single year, it looks like business. It is only when you pull back and see the full decade that the shape becomes undeniable. That is what Tyson's legal team spent months building after the lawsuit was filed. Not a single smoking gun, a mosaic, transaction by transaction, fight by fight, dollar by dollar. The discovery process is where civil lawsuits are actually won or lost, not in front of cameras, in conference rooms, in subpoenas sent to banks and accounting firms, in boxes of financial records that attorneys spend months reviewing line by line. And what Tyson's team finds inside Don King Productions records is, by every account, extraordinary. Here is how the scheme allegedly worked. In plain language, King is not just taking a standard promotional percentage, he is also billing expenses directly against Tyson's earnings. Travel, staff, marketing, production costs, all categorized as fight-related, all deducted before Tyson ever sees a dollar. Some of those expenses are legitimate. Promoting a heavyweight fight is genuinely expensive, but some of those expenses are billed twice. Same invoice, same service, charged once to the event budget and once directly to Tyson's account. Some cannot be verified as services ever actually rendered, and some, this is the part that takes a moment to absorb, are billed to companies that Don King himself owns. He is on both sides of the transaction, the promoter taking the fee and the vendor receiving the expense reimbursement simultaneously. When Tyson's attorneys map this visually, it stops looking like aggressive accounting. It starts looking like a system specifically designed to extract money from a man who was never meant to understand it. But King's defense team is not sitting quietly. Their argument is direct. Every contract King signed with Tyson was reviewed by Tyson's own attorneys before he signed it. His own legal counsel approved every deal. If the terms were exploitative, why did Tyson's own lawyers sign off? It is a powerful question. Tyson's team answers it with equal force. The double billing, the self-dealing expenses, those were never in the contract terms. They happened in the execution, in the accounting after each fight. In a financial infrastructure Tyson was never given visibility into. You can approve a contract, they argue, without knowing the man across the table is going to execute it fraudulently. Then comes Don King's deposition, and this is where the case changes texture. King is a remarkable deponent, animated, expansive, occasionally incoherent in ways that feel almost certainly strategic, absolutely unwilling to give a straight answer without several minutes of context that somehow circles back to his own greatness. But deposition transcripts are long, detailed, and buried inside hundreds of pages of Don King being Don King, Tyson's attorneys find something: inconsistencies, statements that contradict what the documents show, explanations for expense charges that do not match the paper trail, and in at least one instance, one that becomes significant in settlement discussions, a direct denial of something a financial document appears to directly contradict. King does not crumble. He's too experienced for that. But the transcript, annotated against the financial records, becomes a weapon. At this point, both sides are looking at the same calculation. A full trial means those documents get read into the public record. King's financial operations get exposed in detail that will damage his business regardless of the verdict. And Tyson's own spending, which King's team plans to put in front of the jury, gets laid out publicly while Tyson is trying to rebuild his career. Neither side wants that. In 2004, they settle confidentially. Estimates suggest Tyson receives somewhere around $14 million, not $100 million. Not close. But a settlement is not a verdict. It is a negotiated exit, and the fact that King pays to keep those documents out of a public courtroom tells you something the settlement agreement never will. Then, in 2003, something else happens that forces the full picture into the open. Tyson files for bankruptcy, $23 million in debt. The man who earned somewhere between $300 and $400 million in his career is, at 36 years old, broke. Bankruptcy requires full disclosure. Everything comes out. And what the filing reveals is a story with two authors. Yes, King's financial structure is in there, but so is the spending. $2 million on cars in a single year. $230,000 per month in personal expenses during certain periods. A bathtub worth $2 million. The bankruptcy forces a reckoning that the lawsuit alone never could. Not just what was taken from Tyson, but what Tyson took from himself. Both things are true. They have to be. What the legal record ultimately reveals is not a simple story of victim and villain. It reveals a system, boxing, celebrity, financial management, in which a young man from poverty with extraordinary talent and zero structural protection was placed at the center of a machine designed to extract maximum value from him in minimum time. Don King ran that machine most efficiently, but he did not build it alone. The legal system gave Tyson a partial remedy, a negotiated sum, a quiet acknowledgement that something went wrong, but no public verdict, no full accounting, no restoration. That gap between what the law can prove and what actually happened is where this story really lives. And yet, Tyson rebuilds, not through litigation, through something courts cannot manufacture: authenticity. The one-man Broadway show, the podcast, the cannabis business, the Netflix fight that pulls 60 million viewers. He is not $400 million rich, and he never will be again. But for the first time in his adult life, the financial structures around his name belong to him. He is not the product anymore. That is not nothing. That is everything. So what do you do with a story like this? A man loses $400 million. The law investigates, litigates, and settles quietly. A confidential check is written, and life moves on. Was justice served? Partially, in the way civil litigation occasionally serves justice, imperfectly, quietly, and at a price the wronged person keeps paying long after the settlement is cashed. What I want you to sit with is simpler than that. Talent is not protection. Winning is not protection. And the people who tell you they are on your side are often not. The fact that it took a bankruptcy filing for the world to notice what had happened to one of the most famous men alive should tell us something uncomfortable about how closely we actually pay attention. If this story made you see something differently, hit the like button, not just for the algorithm, but because it tells us you want more of this. More cases beneath the headlines, more moments where the documents say something the press releases never will. Subscribe, because the next case we're covering is going to make this one look simple. We're just getting started.